Portland, Oregon, 2008. The sky above the city remained gray most of the year, a dull ceiling that mirrored the atmosphere inside the Cross household. Riley Cross, 17, had spent her life under the weight of expectations she never chose. Her father, Matthew Cross, a renowned surgeon and celebrated author of books on medical ethics, treated their home like an extension of his operating room, clinical, orderly, and merciless toward imperfection. There were no second chances, no space for hesitation, no tolerance for emotional clutter. Every decision, from the color of her notebooks to the colleges she would apply to, had been predetermined in the name of discipline. Riley had learned early that emotions were not to be expressed, only managed. Her tears were seen as inefficiency, her moments of doubt as weakness. In their household, structure replaced affection, and silence filled the void where comfort should have lived. After the divorce, her mother slowly faded from the picture, a vague presence reduced to polite check-ins and birthday cards with delayed postage. Her absence was never explained, just absorbed like everything else into the cold machinery of the family dynamic. Every morning began with precision. Wake up at 6, stretching, a 30-minute review of vocabulary flashcards. Breakfast at exactly 7, oatmeal, green tea, 1 poached egg. Then violin practice, review of the day's assignments, and school. In the evenings, homework under time blocks, extracurriculars logged and measured. She served on the student council, not out of desire, but obligation. She played the violin not for joy, but to fulfill her father's checklist of well-rounded development. Spanish lessons were enforced 3 times a week. Her schedule, laminated and posted on the fridge, left little room to breathe. At school, she was the girl who always had the answer, but never the voice to speak up for herself. Teachers praised her discipline. Classmates admired her from a distance, but no one really knew her. No one saw how she flinched at sudden noises, how tightly she clutched her pencil when correcting her own mistakes, or how she stared out the window for too long, imagining an entirely different version of her life. She didn't rebel. She didn't even consider it. Disobedience felt like betrayal. And betrayal felt like erasure. Every achievement was a transaction. A perfect GPA earned silence instead of criticism. A first-place ribbon brought her father's approval in the form of a nod and a "not bad." When she once brought home a second-place trophy from a statewide essay competition, he merely asked why she had lost. Riley kept the trophy under her bed, face down. Sometimes late at night, she would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering who she might have become if she weren't so carefully constructed. She thought about writing, about art, about leaving. But every time those thoughts surfaced, her father's voice, calm, sharp, final, sliced through them, reminding her that dreams without strategy were delusions. So she folded those secret longings into the smallest corners of herself and closed the drawer tight. The city outside went on with its rain and concrete, its traffic and routine. But inside the Cross household, time moved differently. It was precise, sterile, controlled. Riley had learned to survive in it like an organism adapted to the dark. But deep down, beneath the surface of routines and checklists, something was beginning to stir, small, uncertain, but real. A question, a fracture, a quiet, pulsing thought. What if everything she had been told was for her own good? Was actually the cage? At 20, Riley had followed the path that had been drawn for her with unwavering precision. Medical school in Seattle had never been her dream, but she had enrolled without question because that was what was expected. Her father had already mapped out every semester, every internship, every career milestone. She studied hard, not out of passion, but obligation. Her life in Seattle was quiet and controlled, much like her childhood, except now the silence felt heavier, lonelier. The textbooks were dense, the hospital rotations exhausting, and the pressure omnipresent. Still, she persisted. There was no room for doubt, only execution. That December, the holidays gave her a small window of escape. Without notifying her father, she booked a train ticket back to Portland, craving the familiar, if only to rest in predictability. She arrived early, long before dusk, dragging her suitcase up the icy path to the house she hadn't seen in months. Snow clung to the gutters. The curtains in the front window were drawn. She stepped inside, half expecting the same clinical stillness that had always defined the place. But the moment she crossed the threshold, she heard voices, soft, animated, too personal for a professional conversation. They drifted from the study, a room she had never been allowed to enter uninvited. Her father's voice was unmistakable, lighter than usual, with an unfamiliar warmth. The woman's voice was younger, lilting, and filled with affection. Riley stood frozen in the hallway, listening to laughter she had never heard from him before, followed by plans, mentions of a cabin in Bend, a secret getaway, a promise of quiet mornings together. He called the woman by name. It wasn't a name Riley knew. It wasn't anyone from his circle. It felt wrong, foreign, deliberate. She slipped upstairs without a sound, her mind racing with questions she wasn't ready to answer. That night, she barely slept. Her father never mentioned her surprise visit. At breakfast the next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened, as if no one else had been there. Later that day, after he left for work, Riley walked into the study. The room smelled faintly of cologne and paper. Books lined the shelves, as always, but now there were new items, small details that didn't belong. A scarf draped over the arm of the reading chair, a framed photograph turned inward on the desk. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. It showed a smiling woman with dark hair holding a young boy, no older than 7. Behind them, the man standing with his arm around them, was her father. He looked younger, relaxed, unburdened. The boy was holding a handmade card that read, "Happy Birthday, Dad." On the back of the photo, in delicate handwriting, were the words, "To the best dad in the world." Riley stared at the image, the blood draining from her face. It wasn't just a photo. It was evidence. Evidence of another life. Parallel, secret, carefully kept from her. A second family. A second child. A version of her father who smiled easily and accepted cards that said "Dad" without the weight of performance. She put the frame down and stepped back slowly, her thoughts scattered and jagged. The shock didn't come with anger. Not yet. It came with quiet disintegration. Something fundamental had shifted. Everything she had ever believed about her family, her place, her father's integrity, none of it felt solid anymore. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry. Instead, she went up to her childhood bedroom, pulled her old laptop from the closet, and opened a blank folder. She began saving everything she found: files, documents, photos. She searched names, matched dates, bookmarked social media profiles. With each discovery, the outline of his double life became clearer. She didn't know what she would do with what she was gathering, but instinct told her to keep going. She had spent her life being sculpted into someone else's vision. Now, she would start collecting her own truth, one piece at a time. Between anatomy labs and late-night study sessions, Riley carved out time for something far more personal than exams. She began to build a quiet investigation. Every spare moment became a calculated act of uncovering. In the study, beneath a pile of patient case files, she had found a stack of envelopes tied loosely with a rubber band. Each bore the same address in a suburb outside Salem. The return labels were handwritten and affectionate. The writing on the inside, brief notes on birthdays, casual plans, mentions of "our weekend" and "your special boy," confirmed what she already suspected but hadn't yet admitted to herself. She started visiting the neighborhood when she could slip away from Seattle on weekends. The street was unremarkable, lined with tidy homes and seasonal decorations. From her car, parked under the shadow of a sycamore tree, she watched. On 3 separate occasions, she saw her father arrive. He didn't knock. He used a key. The woman, petite, dark-haired, always in a sweatshirt, opened the door before he reached it. Sometimes she was joined by a child, a boy who looked startlingly familiar. Riley felt her chest tighten as she saw her father scoop the boy up into a hug, his face open and joyful in a way she had never seen growing up. They looked like a family, not hidden, not fractured, real. Emotions collided inside her: betrayal, confusion, and something stranger: relief. For years, she had blamed herself for the emotional coldness in their home, for the absence of warmth that seemed to cling to her no matter how hard she tried to please. Watching this version of her father, she realized it had never been about her. He was capable of softness. He simply reserved it for someone else. Back in Seattle, she created a fake online identity using a generic name and profile photo. With a few harmless messages, she initiated contact with the woman, posing as a potential client for her small interior design business. Their correspondence grew casually friendly. Over time, Riley asked subtle questions, hinting at interest in her personal life. What emerged was a carefully crafted illusion. Matthew Cross, a widower who lost his wife to illness 8 years ago, raising his son with strength and grace. The woman spoke of him with admiration. She mentioned his grief, his dedication, and the slow, gentle way he had let love back into his life. Riley read the messages in silence, her fingers cold against the keys. The image shattered everything. Her father hadn't just deceived her, he had rewritten his own history. He had erased Riley's existence, along with the years they had spent together under one roof. In this parallel narrative, she didn't exist. There was no daughter, no family in Portland, no past. Just a man and his son, noble in their tragedy. The cruelty of it stunned her. She had been made invisible, forgotten by design. Still, she hesitated. She didn't confront him. She didn't expose herself to the woman. Instead, she archived each email, saved screenshots, traced timelines. She created a digital folder hidden under layers of encryption, labeling it with a meaningless title, just in case. She didn't know what she was waiting for. Perhaps she wanted him to come clean. Perhaps she still hoped the version of him that hugged that boy with such warmth could be extended toward her. Then one night, sleepless in her dorm room, she refreshed the woman's social media page and saw the post. A ring. A caption. He asked. I said yes. The photo was taken near the coast. Sunset, waves, a delicate diamond on her finger, and his hand holding hers. Riley sat frozen, the screen glowing dimly in the darkness. She stared at the man who had engineered her life with surgical precision and now built another life in secret. He hadn't told her, hadn't mentioned the engagement. There had been no announcement, no request for understanding. He had simply moved forward, as if her chapter was closed, as if she had been a temporary experiment in perfection, now replaced with something simpler. She closed the laptop slowly and sat in silence. The world she had known was gone, and in its place stood a quiet rage, not loud, not explosive, but precise, cold, and building. The auditorium at the University of Portland filled quickly that evening, a steady stream of faculty, alumni, students, and city officials filtering in to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Dr. Matthew Cross's first book on medical ethics. The event had been publicized for weeks, billed not just as a lecture, but a tribute to a man long considered a paragon of integrity, discipline, and family devotion. Banners with his name and the book's title hung near the stage. A slideshow of accolades played silently on the screens while a string quartet performed softly in the corner. Matthew arrived in a dark suit, composed and smiling, his presence polished as always. Handshakes, photographs, polite words. The audience watched him with admiration, some with reverence. His reputation was untouchable, until that night. Riley had arrived early, dressed plainly, her presence unnoticed among the academic crowd. She sat near the back, her expression unreadable, her hands steady. She carried no protest sign, no microphone, just a USB drive and a quiet resolve. 15 minutes before the lecture began, she approached the technician at the side of the stage and politely requested that a short tribute video be played at the start of the evening. She gave no name, offered no explanation, only said it had been pre-approved. The technician hesitated, but ultimately accepted the drive, trusting the confident tone and the formality of the event. Riley returned to her seat, her heart beating slowly, deliberately. When the lights dimmed, silence settled over the crowd. The MC gave a brief introduction, extolling Matthew's contributions to medicine and his unwavering commitment to moral clarity in the face of modern ethical dilemmas. Applause filled the room. Then the screen behind the podium flickered to life. What appeared first were photographs, not of surgeries or textbooks, but of Matthew standing beside a woman with dark hair and a boy with his eyes and posture. Candid images, a picnic, a beach trip, birthdays, a series of scanned greeting cards followed, handwritten notes from the child, calling him Dad, thanking him for school lunches and trips to the zoo. Then receipts, regular monthly transfers labeled family support, addressed to the same woman. Emails, carefully curated, showed affectionate messages, promises, plans. Each detail added another fracture to the carefully constructed myth. Then came the most damning juxtaposition, a sequence of Matthew's own quotes from previous public lectures and interviews. The foundation of character is consistency. A man's integrity is measured by how he treats those closest to him. Fatherhood is not a role, it is a vow, sacred and indivisible. The words, stripped from their original context and layered against evidence of his duplicity, turned sharp and ironic. The room held its breath. Riley didn't move. She stood near the exit, her posture still, eyes locked on the screen, not seeking revenge, but release. She said nothing. No voiceover explained the montage, no narration justified it. The truth needed no interpretation. From the front row, Matthew watched with growing horror. His expression shifted, first confusion, then realization, then anger. He turned to the technician, to the MC, but no one moved. The room remained frozen. When the video ended, silence reigned for a moment longer. Then came the whispers, disbelief, recognition. The applause began, slow and scattered, but it grew. A reluctant acknowledgement of the truth, then a full wave of release from an audience that had long believed in the illusion of moral perfection. Matthew rose from his chair and left the stage without speaking. He walked briskly through the aisle, past colleagues and students, past cameras and murmured reactions. He didn't look for Riley. He didn't try to explain. The doors closed behind him. Riley remained in the shadows. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply exhaled, not with triumph, but with the quiet breath of someone who had carried a heavy truth for too long. The truth was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the room now. It lived in the silence that followed. In the days that followed the lecture, the story spread faster than Riley anticipated. Local newspapers ran headlines questioning the personal integrity of one of Portland's most esteemed public figures. Talk radio hosts dissected the footage. Online forums buzzed with speculation, sympathy, outrage. The footage from the university event had been captured by more than one phone, and soon it was everywhere, on social media feeds, community blogs, and even in national articles discussing the public downfall of a moral authority. The university, caught in the storm of exposure, launched a formal inquiry into possible ethical violations. Former students and colleagues came forward with accounts of favoritism, controlling behavior, and professional manipulation. The board suspended his faculty privileges pending investigation. His scheduled speaking engagements were quietly canceled. Sponsors withdrew. For the first time in decades, Matthew Cross vanished from Portland's public eye. The woman Riley had watched from her car, the one with the dark hair and quiet smile, disappeared from the online world. Her design business website was taken down. Social media accounts were deactivated. No public statements were issued. Riley never heard from her. The silence, in its own way, was louder than anger. A life once hidden had imploded. Its parts scattered and vanished. Riley stayed in Seattle. She declined interview requests. She ignored emails from media outlets asking for comment. She didn't need to explain herself to strangers. Her inbox filled with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years, some cautiously supportive, others laced with thinly veiled judgment. Former friends from her father's world stopped responding to her messages. Family acquaintances she once saw at holiday dinners unfollowed her online. Her name became a dividing line. Some saw her as brave, others as destructive. But she felt neither. Not brave, not vindictive, just free. Her father didn't call, not once. He made no effort to confront or clarify. The man who had structured her life down to the hour simply disappeared from it. The house she once lived in stood silent behind its iron gate, its windows dark. She had driven by it once, late at night, just to see it. Nothing had changed. It still looked perfect from the outside. Then, weeks later, a message appeared in her inbox. It was from an unfamiliar name, but she recognized it instantly. The boy from the photographs. His email was short, simple sentences, careful spelling. He wrote that he had seen the video, that his mother had told him enough to understand. He said he had always wondered why their father kept a locked drawer in his desk, why he avoided questions about the past. He had guessed things, but never fully understood them until now. He told her he had watched the footage twice, that the moment her face appeared at the back of the auditorium, standing still, he knew. He knew she was his sister. There was no blame in the message, no confusion. Only something else. Curiosity, maybe even hope. He wrote that he had always wanted a sibling, that sometimes he imagined having someone older who could explain things when they didn't make sense. Someone who might understand him in a way even his mother couldn't. Someone whose silence felt familiar. His message ended with a question, not dramatic, not heavy, just a quiet invitation. He asked if they could start over, if she'd like to talk sometime. Riley stared at the screen for a long time. The cursor blinked, waiting. The room around her was still. For the first time in weeks, she felt the silence shift. Not heavy, not hollow, just open, like the beginning of something new. 2 years had passed since the night Riley stood at the back of an auditorium and watched the truth unfold in silence. The city had moved on, as cities always do. Names faded from headlines. Scandals dissolved into background noise. But Riley's life had taken a direction no one could have predicted, not even herself. She never returned to medical school. What once felt like destiny now felt like a distant artifact, the remnants of a path someone else had drawn for her. She withdrew from the program quietly, without ceremony or announcement. The textbooks went into storage. The white coat stayed in its plastic covering, untouched. Instead, she bought a second-hand camera with her savings and enrolled in evening classes on visual storytelling. It felt clumsy at first, like learning a new language. But as the lens steadied in her hands, something inside her began to realign. She didn't need permission anymore. She didn't need validation. She only needed clarity and the courage to follow it. Her first project started as an exercise, but became a lifeline. She called it Portrait of a Father. The film wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about the subtle architecture of silence, the weight of secrets, and the quiet rebellion of telling your version of the story. She used voiceovers sparingly, letting images carry the truth. Photographs layered with archival footage, pages from journals slowly turning in frame, glimpses of herself walking through familiar neighborhoods, now empty of meaning. The final scene was simple. Her face on camera, steady and unadorned. No lighting tricks, no makeup, just her voice. She spoke a single sentence. It had taken her years to write. Sometimes family is who we choose after those who were supposed to be there disappear. The film was submitted to a regional festival, and to her surprise, it resonated. Screenings followed, then invitations, interviews. People approached her after showings not to praise the filmmaking, but to say they understood. They shared their own stories. Fathers who vanished emotionally, mothers who masked resentment as love, brothers who became strangers. Riley listened, and in listening, she healed a little more each time. Her life now was modest. She lived in a small apartment above a bookstore in Olympia. She worked freelance, editing projects, helping nonprofits with media content, filming small human stories. She had no schedule beyond the one she created herself. Mornings began when she chose. Meals were taken when she was hungry. Her world was quieter now, slower, full of air. She kept in touch with the boy, her half-brother. Their conversations were hesitant at first, careful not to stir too much of the past. But slowly they built something unnameable, but real. They shared music, stories. Once, they met for coffee. He brought a book she had once mentioned in passing. She brought a small camera and filmed their shoes as they walked beside the lake. She never reconnected with her father. There were no letters, no apologies, but she no longer needed them. The absence no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a closed chapter, a door she didn't need to reopen. When people asked her now who she was, she didn't list degrees or family names. She said she was a filmmaker, a listener, a daughter of silence who had learned to speak. And finally, she lived without masks, without the shadow of someone else's idea of perfection. She lived simply, honestly, unapologetically, without fear.